excuse me, I'm going to go through a quick little review for week 8 for like the lecture quiz review. So just to give an overview, right? So we talked about the cardiovascular system and the lymphatic system. Really hit on the cardiovascular system, but I don't want you to forget about the lymphatic system, right? We know that the lymphatic system consists of lymph, right? The lymphatic vessels and lymphatic tissues and organs, right? Specifically that lymph, right? That's going to be that fluid connective tissue that's transported and monitored by this system, right? And that lymph is going to consist of interstitial fluid, right? That's going to resemble the plasma, but it's going to have lower concentrations of proteins, right? Also within this lymph, this fluid, you're going to have these lymphocytes, right? These are going to be the cells, right? These lymphatic cells that are going to be responsible for like the immune response. We're also going to have some macrophages too within our lymph fluid, right? These lymphatic vessels, this is what that lymph will pass through, right? It's going to pass through these lymphatic vessels to get through to the lymphatic tissue and the organs, right? And these vessels, again, will deliver that lymph back to the venous circulation. So we know that that fluid will seek out, right, in the tissues from the arterial supply, right, picked up by the lymphatic system, right? And the lymphatic vessels will transport and deliver that lymph, that fluid, back to the venous circulation for it to be continuously flowing around the body, right? So lymphocytes, right, part of the lymphatic system, part of that lymph, right? These are going to be the primary cells of the lymphatic system, right? They're going to be responsible for specific immunity, right? So they're going to respond to like invading microorganisms such as bacteria and viruses. They're going to respond to abnormal cells, right? Cancer cells, or just foreign proteins or toxins, right? Released by some bacteria. They're going to travel throughout the cell, right? They're going to travel throughout the cell, or throughout the body, rather. They're going to exit the bloodstream to enter that interstitial space, and they're going to re-enter the bloodstream via that lymphatic vessels, okay? Remember the different types of lymphocytes, right? T cells, right? Those thymus-dependent cells, right? They depend on the thymus to become immunocompetent, to mature, right? We have B cells. Those are going to be those bone marrow-derived cells, right? And natural killer cells, right? And each of these type of cells have a distinctive biochemical and functional characteristic. I want you to remember, though, that there's going to be two types of immune responses, right, from these lymphocytes. We're going to have cell-mediated immunity, right? That's where we have the direct attack by activated T cells, right? So the T cell will directly attach itself to the pathogen, right? Because this T cell directly attaches itself to the pathogen, we call that cell-mediated immunity, right? Now we have another type of immune response, and that's antibody-mediated immunity, right? And this is where we have attacks by circulating antibodies released by these plasmacytes. In other words, these are going to be coming from these B cells, right? So the pathogen is going to be attacked by the antibodies produced by the B cells, right? So T cells, right? So T cells is cell-mediated immunity, whereas B cells, right, they produce those antibodies. This is where we have a immune response called antibody-mediated immunity, right? Also, this is called humoral immunity, right? Because it's traveling in the blood system, the blood supply. Okay? So, moving to the blood supply, right? Specifically blood. We know that blood is a form of fluid connective tissue. It's a connective tissue type, right? Blood is a type of connective tissue. Then it consists of two components. Plasma, right, which is going to be that liquid matrix, right? That's going to be made up of the water, the electrolytes, the nutrients, right? The proteins, such as the albumin, the globulins, right? The fibrinogens, right? And we also have formed elements, right? So blood consists of the plasma and formed elements. Now these formed elements are these blood cells, right? And cell fragments that are going to be suspended in that plasma, right? What are those going to be? Those formed elements are going to be the erythrocytes, right? Remember, erythrocytes are going to be these red blood cells, right? The RBCs, right? And these red blood cells, they're going to help to transport oxygen and carbon dioxide throughout the body. Remember their structure, though, right? They're going to be flattened, circular, right? They're going to lack organelles, right? No nucleus, no mitochondria, no ribosomes. None of those membrane-bound organelles are going to be within these red blood cells. It's really just going to be water and protein, right? Especially that hemoglobin protein, right? That will transport those molecules of oxygen and carbon dioxide. Remember leukocytes. Leukocytes are these white blood cells, right? Part of the immune system, right? For protection, right? So they're going to function and produce and provide an immune response, right? The other type of formed element is these platelets, right? These platelets, these are going to be involved in blood clotting, right? Or hemostasis, right? Which is blood clotting, okay? To patch up any damages in the blood vessels, okay? So remember the different blood types, right? If you're blood type A, you're going to have A antigens and you're going to have anti-B antibodies, right? Remember the universal recipients. Universal recipients are going to be the AB blood types, right? And remember the universal donors. Universal donors are going to be blood type O, right? Blood type O. Why? Because they don't have no antigens on their cells, okay? Looking at the cardiovascular system, the heart, right? We talked about the heart a lot. The heart is about the size of a clenched fist, right? And it's going to consist of 4 chambers, right? That's why I say 2 floors, right? 4 rooms, right? 2 atria on the top, right? Right atrium, left atrium, right? And 2 ventricles, right ventricle, left ventricle, all right? The heart pumps blood. Right? Main function of it is a pump, basically, right? It's going to pump into 2 circuits. We have the pulmonary circuit and we have the systemic circuit, okay? Now, the pulmonary circuit, right? The pulmonary circuit that we can see right here, right? The whole function of the pulmonary circuit is to pump blood to the lungs and back to the heart, right? So we want to remember pulmonary circuit, pump blood to the lungs and back to the heart, right? Literally to pump that deoxygenated blood to the lungs to get oxygenated and for it to come back to the heart, right? For it to come back to the heart to then get into the systemic circuit, right? And that's where we're going to pump oxygenated blood, right, to the body, right? The systems, right? The systemic, you're sending that blood coming to and from the heart throughout the body, right? And I want you to understand that each circuit is going to involve arteries, veins, and capillaries, right? Arteries, they transport blood away, right? Artery away from the heart, whereas veins transport blood toward the heart, right? Arteries and veins, they meet up at these specialized junctions called these capillaries, these small microscopic blood vessels, these capillaries, right? These are vessels that interconnect arteries and veins, okay? So when we're looking at the heart, right, the outside of the heart, the pericardium, right? The heart is going to be surrounded by a pericardium, right? That serous membrane lining the pericardial cavity. It's going to consist of 2 parts, though. We're going to have that outer fibrous pericardium, and we're going to have that inner serous pericardium. That inner serous pericardium is going to consist of 2 layers. That visceral layer, which is also called the epicardium, right, attached to the surface of the heart. And we're going to have that outer parietal layer, right? And that's going to be adjacent to that fibrous pericardium, okay? And so the space between these 2 serous layers, right, is going to be called that pericardial cavity, and that's going to contain that pericardial fluid, which is going to lubricate and reduce friction within that space, okay? So looking at the structures of the heart wall, right, the heart wall is going to consist of 3 layers, always 3 layers, right? So we have the epicardium, right, which is also called the visceral peritoneum. The visceral cardium, the visceral pericardium, right? Okay, epicardium is also called the visceral pericardium, right? That's going to be the outermost layer, okay? Then you have the myocardium, right? That myocardium is going to be the middle layer, consisting of the cardiac tissue, right? Cardiac muscle cells, connective tissue, blood vessels, and nerves. And then we have the endocardium, that internal layer, that endothelial surface, okay? That's going to be the most inner layer, and it's going to have that endothelial layer, okay? So remember that? Right, so this just goes over the different structures of the heart, right? So I'll pay very close attention to this slide right here, right? So right here we have right atrium, right? To get from that right atrium to the right ventricle, right? Got to go through that tricuspid valve, right? Looking at, that's the left side of the heart. Looking at the right, sorry, that was the right side of the heart. Looking at the left side of the heart, right? We have the left atrium up top, and we have the left ventricle, right? To get from the left atrium to the left ventricle, you got to go through this mitral valve, right? Also called the bicuspid valve, okay? So make sure you don't do like me just now. Make sure when you're looking at the heart, right, you know the different sides for it, right? This is going to be the right side of the heart, right? This is going to be the left side of the heart, right? It's hard when you're looking at it sometimes because, you know, my right is over here, your left, you know what I mean, right? So just remember the different sections of the heart, all right? Remember the different valves, okay? And I'll go over the blood flow in another video and briefly, so you'll be able to see that, okay? Remember those coronary blood vessels, right? These coronary blood vessels, they supply the cardiac muscle tissue with blood, right? It's these coronary blood vessels that supply the actual muscle tissue of the heart with nutrient blood, okay? And it's those coronary veins that drain the cardiac muscle, right? The cardiac cells of blood, okay? So remember those coronary blood vessels, right? Again, they're going to supply the cardiac muscle tissue with nutrient blood via that coronary circulation, okay? So when we're looking at the blood vessels, right, I definitely want you to understand the layers of the blood vessel, right? So the layers of the blood vessel wall. On the outside, right, on the outside we have this adventitia, right? This adventitia is going to be the outermost layer, forms that fibrous connective tissue sheath around that blood vessel. Then we have the middle layer, the tunica media, right? That's going to be the middle layer, right? Containing layers of muscle, of smooth muscle, and elastin is going to be in this layer, okay? And then the innermost layer is going to be the tunica intima, right? This is going to be the innermost layer of the blood vessel, right? And this is going to include a lining of endothelial cells, right? Smooth endothelial cells, okay? So remember the three different layers of a blood vessel: adventitia, right? The tunica externa, right, which is the outermost layer, the tunica media, which is the middle layer, and the tunica intima, which is the innermost layer, okay? And I also want you to remember, just briefly, right, go over the different type of vessels that's going to be in the body, right? Looking at the heart, right, we have this ascending aorta, goes to that aortic arch, right? From that aortic arch, we have branches of vessels, being the brachiocephalic trunk, right? That left common carotid and the left subclavian, right? And notice how this brachiocephalic trunk branches off into the right common carotid, vertebral, that's going to feed the brain, right? The right subclavian, go all the way to the axillary vessel, lead to the brachial blood vessels, right? Lead to the radial, the ulnar blood vessels. Remember, these vessels, they're going to be termed, right? They're going to be named after the location of where they're at, right? Same thing with the veins, really, right? These veins are going to really follow the same direction of these arteries, okay? All right, remember some of these veins, okay? The external jugular vein, right? These jugular veins, that's going to drain the brain of blood, right? the subclavian veins, right? This is where those lymphatic trunks dump into. Remember this great saphenous vein, right? This great saphenous vein, the longest vein in the body, right? So there's a few things that I want you guys to remember, okay, to prepare for the quiz. But thank you guys for listening. Make sure you guys study, okay?